today's video we're going to be making this square edge jig for a hand plane that's going to allow you to squarely joint both thin and wide boards. So I've shown you in the last few videos how to square a board using a hand plane and also how to square a thin board using your workbench as a reference. So today we're going to be doing a third one, and that is a portable jig that you can magnetically snap or clamp onto the side of your plane to do the job in your vise holding a board, so you have a lot more stability and referencing for actually square jointing that edge. So the length of the pieces I've got here are both the same length. They're just under 230 millimeters long, which I believe is just under 9.5 inches. I wouldn't really go any shorter than this, but you could go a little bit longer if you wanted to. I've chosen to use Tasmanian oak and jarrah here. You can obviously make this jig out of whatever scraps you got, as long as they've got flat reference faces and edges. Now, I've had these on the shooting board. They're all squared up. All the edges are square. Everything's square and ready to go on these. Now, the reason I like to use a shorter one is that you can use this jig down on a number 4 without it going too far past the edge of the plane. And you can then obviously use it on any longer planes, as long as it fits in reference to the blade, which I'll explain a little bit when we are going to fit this to the plane. You don't need it to be super long. I've seen some people make really long jigs. There's no real need to reference it that wide. As long as you've got about that far, or 2 or 3 inches, or up to about 75 mil, something like that, in front of the blade, and then the rest behind it, you're going to reference and be able to square nice and easy with that, because it's going to control the flow of the blade, and that's all you really need. In all honesty, I did see someone make a jig that was just a little L shape that was clamped on just in front of the blade, and that could work as well, but I prefer a little more referencing, especially for you beginners out there. Once we've made it, you'll see what I'm talking about. So we obviously need to attach this onto the edge here. Now, you can keep this really long if you want, or you could actually have it shorter, proceeding below the bottom of here by about a couple of inches. Problem there is, the longer you have this come down, the wider your board has to be to use it, because you can't just clamp it in your vise if you're taking up this much space. So if you want to use it on narrow boards, make sure you cut this fence shorter. If you want to use it on longer, or you're intending on using it on much wider boards, you could leave it out at this 120, but I'm going to bring it down to about 50 mil below this top piece when it comes through, so it's going to sit about 50 mil below the hand plane. Now, in doing this, you want to make sure you got one fully square face that's flat and square to everything, which for my case, that's actually this one. I've hand planed it, so this is sitting flat. All the sides are sitting square to this, so it's not essential that they all sit square, but it does make it a little bit easier if you've got fully square and dimension boards. What we're going to be doing here is overlapping this jarrah piece here by about 20 mil, and then we're just going to attach that onto this. So what I'm going to do is get my marking gauge. You could just use a pencil line if you want. I just find the marking gauge a little easier, so I'm going to set this to 20 mil. And on our non-reference face, so this is the flat face, this is the side we're going to be attaching it. So I'm going to run a 20 mil line just through here. Now, it doesn't really matter if you can't really see that on camera. There's just a line there, so when I come to put this on, I know where it's lining up with. You might be thinking we're going to go ahead and attach this straight away. Well, before we do that, I mentioned the blade before, so what we need to do is, because this, when it comes on, is going to sit under the plane like this, if we want to adjust that blade, we need to have some sort of a relief where the blade sits on this, so we can still adjust the blade so the piece of wood does not block it. So as I said, we want to come back 70 odd, 75 mil, something like that. I'm just going to eyeball it to about here. That seems about right to me. So now what I'm going to do is just square a line across the top here. And I want to go kind of just a little distance either side. So in this area, so I'm going to strike that gap a little bit larger, and we're just going to remove this in a little V shape down into here. The angles are not really important, just that it gives you the clearance you want. You don't need to come down too far. A little bit further gives you a little more adjustment depending on the plane you're on. We're just gonna square a line across both sides. So now that we've got that square, we can just angle it. Now this angle doesn't matter. You're just roughly aiming for the middle. It can even be a square bottom like this is probably going to be because my angle's a little bit off. Or I'll just go a little bit deeper. And we can see we've now notched that out. Now, since we're looking for attention to detail here, we're going to grab our chisel and clean it up. If you want to tidy up a little more, just a little bit of sandpaper on a square. And we just rolled those edges, and now this is ready. When we bring our hand plane in, we're going to try and make sure that we always line our blade up in that section. And so we use hand saws and hand tools here, so we're going to do it in the correct order and actually cut it to width now before we put it together. So how wide are we going to go? Well, I was talking about maybe 50 mil or 2 inches below the surface, maybe a little bit less. I'm going to go 40 mil plus the 20 mil of that line we already put on there. So I'm going to run a line at 60 millimeters. Now, I'm just going to keep this as a ballpark figure, because what we're going to do is saw off the line as I usually do, then use the shooting board to bring that back so we keep it square just the way we want. So everything stays square, coplanar, which is what you're going to want in a referencing jig. See that line there? I'm just going to saw it down straight on one side and do that, and I'm going to do that in the vise. So this is the waist side here. So I'm just going to mark that on all sides of the board so I keep that as my reference so I understand what's going on. Establish square as usual and then follow your line. You want to go ahead, grab your shooting board and your shooting plane, and we're going to reference off either of these edges. Keep our flat reference face down for doing this, and that'll make sure it's square, but the bottom of this, you can put a decorative shape on it. It doesn't actually have to be square. What I'm going to put down, and so now we've come to our line there. This is all square, and we're ready to actually start putting this together. So now I can pencil that line in, which was that gauge I did right at the start, that 20 mil gauge line, so just so you can see it. And so we're going to put glue along here. I'm going to use super glue for this, and then we're going to line it up and just hold it in that alignment until it tacks into place. This is just a thick super glue. Use whatever glue you've got. So I'm just going to spread it around a little bit, such as this. And then we're going to just rub it around slightly, line it up. Got a little bit of tacking time with this, just to get it right. Which is why I don't like to use activator in something like this. I want it to be perfectly aligned. I'm just going to hold that down until it sets. My alignment has gone off ever so slightly, and if that did bother you, you could just put it on the shooting board and clean it up, but there's no real need to. We can see that's going to take a little bit longer to set, but with something like this, because we want that reference clean, it gives us time to come back in on this side and just wipe any excess out of there, just so you have no glue sitting in along this edge that's going to affect how this fence works. Really, with a square jig like this versus one that you buy that's obviously not adjustable, that's just held on with magnets, is that you can adjust this wood to your hand plane. So if the wing is not square, you can actually adjust this to bring it square, or you could adjust the lateral adjuster on your blade. Now, the reason I don't like adjusting the lateral adjuster on the blade to bring it in square in this particular circumstance is that as you bring the plane through, you could actually take a deeper cut on the side where you've put more blade out than the side where there's less blade, and you're still going to be out of square. So it's important that we adjust this jig. You could just go ahead and clamp this on here as you're working it out, or you can add magnets like I'm going to. Let's go ahead. I'm going to whack some magnets in there just so we know where this is going to be held on the plane after the magnets are in place. And I'm just going to be using some 14mm rare earth magnets. I'm not quite sure how many I'm going to need to hold it on here, so I'm going to go ahead and put probably 3 or 4, see if it holds, and then maybe add an extra couple if need be. So these are 14mm by 3mm thick, so we need to recess these magnets into this 8mm piece that I've got here, 3mm. Now to do that, because you want the flat bottom, because I don't want to punch through this thin stuff, I'm going to use a Forstner bit. I've got a 15mm Forstner bit. Would have been better if I had the exact size, but that's fine. We're still going to glue these in place with a little bit of super glue, so it's perfectly alright. And to do these cuts, because I want them to be relatively accurate, you could do them with a power drill, such as the one I've got here, but you could even do them with a hand brace or even a egg beater drill, something like that. But I have my manual drill press over here, my hand crank drill press, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. So let me get that set up and we'll get to marking these in. Now with these, I'm going to place them as close as I can down to the bottom part of the fence here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and if we need more we can add them in between them after. So we're going to start with 4. And we can see that that's about the right depth. So now what I'm going to do is try and get a mark on this so I can do the same on every single one of them. I'm going to try and just mark it with pencil so you can see that's leaving a line on it. I'll mark that on both sides. And that's going to be easier than using something like painter's tape in this situation right here. So now you can see just here, holes lined up there, evenly spaced across the hand plane, and we'll find out if that's enough. If I had to add more, I could add some more in between here, or come up onto the higher part of the wing just here to help hold it. So let's jump back down to the bench here, and we'll go ahead and glue these magnets in. So I'm just going to drop a little bit of thin CA in there. Obviously try not to get it everywhere like I just did then. If you get it on the surface like that, just wipe it clean. So now that they're in there, I'm going to get a bit of activator. And just give them a few minutes to set in there. So I'm just going to test it. Looks like they're holding. I'm just going to leave it a few more minutes before we test the hand plane on it, because if that CA glue is not set, it'll pull them back out, which we don't really want, and then we'll have to glue them back in again. But you can see here, they're lined up perfectly. There's our little notch, and our jig is starting to come together quite good here now. So from this point, after we fit it, and we'll check for square, we'll have to adjust this part of the fence here now. The advantage of a wooden fence like this is, hopefully you get lucky and you can just put it all together and it's all square. If you're using plywood, you've got a greater chance of that. Since I'm using real wood, and if we have a close look just in here, when I glued this, it didn't come together, so I've got a little gap here. So this actually moved a little bit out of my reference of square. So what we have to do here is adjust the wood here until it sits square with the bottom of your hand plane. Now you might be able to put multiple different hand planes in here and they might not be square, so choose the one you're most likely to do your jointing with. That's why I'm going to choose my number 5 that I use a lot, that's got a square straight through blade. No bending on corners, no cambers, nothing, which is best for square jointing a board. But if you do have a camber, as I mentioned before, you can actually thickness this fence out further so you're sure you're cutting in the middle, and you could have some screw-on design so you could take it on and off. So these magnets are now dry, so let's jump back down here and we'll fit the hand plane to the jig. So we're going to line up on the top, and you heard that nice positive contact. It comes on and off with relative ease. Grab your most accurate square. I'm going to grab my combination square in this case because it's going to give you the most accurate result. If you can see here, that's not going to come in square for me. It's out a lot, so I'm going to have to take material off the top here to fit it. Now, if you've used plywood, you're probably not going to run into these same issues as me, but it is vital that you know how to do it in case you do. So we have to obviously adjust the jig to fit. And whenever you glue things together, there's always a chance of things not sticking properly, things moving a little bit, sticking where you don't want them to stick and things like that. So it will put things out of square, which is not ideal, but it will happen. So now we need to know how to put that back into square. The other thing that can get put out by doing this is if your magnets sit a little bit proud, it's going to change that angle slightly and throw this off. That's why I've gone ahead and put these magnets in first, to ensure that any adjustment we do is accurate to the way it's sitting on the plane. So what I've done here is I've pushed my bench dog up, so I'm going to be planing up against that as a stop. I've just got a little offcut of the same material that I had here, and I'm just going to sit that under there just so this doesn't want to tip. I've got a slightly longer piece of scrap here, which I'm just going to use to support it. It's going to hold it better. Just going to go ahead and grab my smaller hand plane here. So you see, it's a bit of a jiggling effort to ensure you're sitting square. Now this is getting pretty close now. I just have to take a tiny bit more off. If we look at that now, we are now square. So now we've got this done, let's get a piece in the vise. I'll show you on this skinny piece of plywood that I've got down here, and then a wider board, just to show you that this works on skinny pieces as well as wider boards. So you want to hold over the top of the fence here. I like to hold it up on top of the plane, put my finger in here and just hold on the bottom, and I'm kind of just holding that in place. Come up, reference as normal. just like that, you get a lot more sort of support in here because you're holding that and you're referencing. And like normally you get a lot more twisting like this, but it takes that out of it. Now if we look at that, to my eye, that is dead square on a 6mm piece of plywood. It goes to show when you're jointing a thin board like that, that a fence like this works. And it also works on other boards. So let's quickly grab something else and I'll show you that it works on that as well. But if it works on a thin board, it's going to work on any board. Line the blade up where you want it. Hold it with correct technique, like this. And here we're getting nice full-length shavings here. And if we have a look at this board, dead square. Just as you would expect from a jig that we've squared up to do it. Now, I did notice when I was doing that piece of pine, I was pushing it, that this fence was actually sliding a little bit more than I would like, which means I'm probably going to come back in and add a couple of extra magnets in there just to make sure it doesn't slide. So, if you look at this fence now, I've gone ahead and just added a quick paste wax finish to it. Try and keep it off the magnets, and you really want to, this fence part that slides against your work, get that nice and shiny and polished up so that's going to slide freely and not cause friction on your work. So whether you've made your jig out of hardwood like I have, or plywood, or you've just clamped it onto your hand plane because you don't have magnets or you don't want to use the magnets, this is still going to be a lifesaver, and this is the very basic design that you can come up with. You could obviously do some curving and carving onto something like this and make it your own. But I'm here to just give you different ways to do these jobs, and I find that you're going to save a lot of money by making one of these square edge jigs versus buying one. I know the Veritas one here in Australia is about $90, so there's a big saving in making your own. Plus, you can adjust it to your hand plane to make sure it works correctly, which may or may not happen with the Veritas one, depending on how squared the wings of your hand plane are. So, if you liked the video and you'd like to support me, please consider liking and subscribing down below. And don't forget to comment down below while you're down there. What questions do you have with this? Have you made one of yourself? What are your experiences with straight edge jigs? And maybe even leave your techniques and tips for squaring thin boards or whatnot down below. And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon and even Instagram. So if you'd like to see some more videos like this video you've seen here today, please check out the video up here where I'll show you how to square a board without the fence, and also the intermediate woodworking playlist that this video is part of. Bye for now.